Awesome. Our first speaker is Thomas Riggins. Thomas is a retired philosophy teacher from NYU, the New School of Social Research, and others. Who received a PhD from the CUNY Graduate Center in '83, and he's consulting editor for the Midwestern Marx Institute. He's been active in the civil rights and peace movement since the 1960s, when he was chairman of the Young People's Socialist League at Florida State University. And he also worked for CORE in voter registration in North Florida. He has written for many online publications like People's World and Political Affairs, where he was an associate editor. He also served on the board of the Bertrand Russell Society and was president of the Corliss Lamont chapter in New York City of the American Humanist Association. He's the author of Reading the Classical Texts of Marxism and Eurocommunism, a critical reading of Santiago Carrillo and Eurocommunist revisionism. Here's Thomas.
Well, going to introduce this book in the spirit of our comrades from the Middle Flowery Kingdom. I have the 5 takeaways that we need to have from this book. I should reformulate that as the Middle Flowery People's Republic. The 5 takeaways for the purity fetish. After you've heard the other speakers and I've had a chance to read the book, these are the 5 most important things I think that you'll have to remember. One is we have to take away the idea that those Marxists that refuse to accept the reality of the states and peoples who are struggling to institute socialism, to build Marxism in their countries, that have faced failures and are unable to make mistakes, that this does not mean that they're supposed to be rejected and denounced as traitors to Marxism because they're not living completely according to some ideal idea of what Marxism and socialism is supposed to look like. The real world is very different from the ideal world, as we learned from reading Hegel. It's one thing to say all men are created equal. It takes a civil war to make it begin to happen. The second takeaway is those people who dismiss certain elements of the working class in this country, especially in this country, but other countries too, because they are backwards in their thinking, reactionary thinking, they have racist ideas, whatever the problems are that make these people hostile to us or hostile to progressivism. Instead of blaming them, we should remember it's the system that's creating these people. And our job is to educate them and try to free them from the shackles that have been put on them by the capitalist system, instead of denouncing them as deplorables and useless and trying to ignore them. That's the second thing that Carlos, one of the 5 things that Carlos puts forth in that book. That's the second takeaway I think we have to make. The third takeaway we have to do is fight back against dumping on China from the left. This seems to be something that is incorrigible in the press now because of the Cold War starting up with China again. Academic leftists and the petty bourgeois leftists that claim to be Marxists want to attack China, call China capitalist because it has to go through these reforms to try to improve the living standards of their people. We all know the struggles that are going on in China. And so we have to fight back and it's not our job to defend China, but it's our job to explain to people the reality of what the Chinese struggle is, and that that's a form of defense. But I don't want to be labeled as defender of the Chinese, but at least explainer of what's going on there and why we should support the Chinese and support the Chinese government in its efforts to increase the living standards, not only the Chinese, but to bring about a more peaceful world to live in, and to bring about real foreign aid to the peoples of Africa and South America, instead of the phony type of foreign aid the United States insists on giving that requires them to vote the way we tell them to in the United Nations. The fourth takeaway is the people who ignore the progressive history of the United States. The people who want to dump Lincoln statues are being tossed away now in some ultra-left groups. it's true that our country has a checkered past with the Indian removals and with racism and with slavery. Nevertheless, there were people back in those days that fought against that, even though they didn't have the advanced positions of the 21st century. They knew slavery was wrong. They tried to do something to eliminate slavery. They may have been caught up in the system themselves because they were economically in the plantation system. But we have to remember that just to try to dump on all American progressive history because of the weaknesses of the past is alienating from people, regular Americans today, who have some feeling of patriotic pride in their country. It's true, the Communist Manifesto says the working people have no country. We can't forget that we are actually internationalists, but we can tell them they do have a country. It's not as great as Trump cracks it up to be, but it's not as bad as people who think that we're all colonial settlers and something. We have to give everything back to the original inhabitants. Okay, that's the fourth thing. And the last thing is the left is soft on the anti-imperialism front. There's too many people on the left who are also flying Ukrainian flags in their backyard or on porches. And we have to remember that any struggle against the major enemy of the world's people, which is U.S. imperialism, by far the most bloodthirsty killing machine since World War II, just the number of Vietnamese they killed and the number of North Koreans that were bombed out far exceeds anything any left group or any left country has done as a communist country or as a socialist country, or even as a bourgeois country. I'm talking about Russia, which is abandoned communism, but nevertheless plays a progressive role against U.S. imperialism. Then that's the common enemy of humanity right now. And they should be getting, at least we should be supporting them, if not outright cheering. We should at least be supporting their right to defend themselves from NATO and the use of other countries like Ukraine as puppets and proxy wars against them. If we read Carlos's book and see that the purity fetish are those Marxists or people who claim to be Marxists, who in the name of trying to be true Marxists don't accept any of those 5 takeaways that I put out, do we understand that these people are, whatever their good intentions are, we on the left and in the Communist Party at least had a distinction between objective and subjective enemies. And they may be subjectively communists and friends, but they are objectively helping U.S. imperialism. And I think reading Carlos's book will make anybody who's not aware of that aware of that. And this book is a big advance in the struggle here in the United States.